So also welcome to Azure Stack HCI Days from organized by Carsten here, and my name is Manfred. Carsten already introduced me, and I would talk about configuring Azure Stack HCI with Windows Admin Center. Let's say more the basic things. So Carsten already showed you Windows Admin Center and the stretch cluster, specific topics, and I want to show you how to configure Azure Stack HCI with Windows Admin Center. And we had some comments and questions about Windows Admin Center in the chat already, in the Q&A already, and I will try to take them also. And I added some slides about Windows Admin Center itself because there were also some strategic questions I initially didn't plan to talk about. So when we go to the Windows Admin Center basic things, when we talk about what is Windows Admin Center, what it is for, what do we do with Windows Admin Center, then we can say Windows Admin Center is a small installation. It's a web-based application we use to manage our Windows-based IT in our network. It's, let's say, from my point of view, it's focused on Windows Server, but we can also manage Windows Client with it. It's a very small installer. It's only 60 megabytes of size, actually. We don't need Internet Information Server. We don't need a SQL Server or things like this. We only use a small installer that brings everything in the installation package. And we are very flexible regarding the connectivity. So we can use a modern browser like Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome to connect here. And we do not need any Azure or internet connectivity to work with Windows Admin Center. For sure, we need to download it, but we don't need a connectivity after downloading, installing the Windows Admin Center, except when we want to update the Windows Admin Center. Then we have advantages when we have an internet connection, but it would also be offline, impossible to bring packages, extension packages, and so on offline to the Windows Admin Center. The management is done on the target host without installation of any agents. So you don't need any agent installation there. This is a great thing. This is very helpful to use it in an existing environment where you don't want to choose to change anything. And the whole management activities are sent via PowerShell remote and WinRM remote to the managed hosts. And there are different ways how to implement Windows Admin Center. My preferred option is to have an management server, dedicated VM or physical host you use for management. You will need a server for backup and things like this. And this is the reason why I would recommend this management host or management server, but it would also be possible to install Windows Admin Center directly onto a client you use for management. So there you will have the situation, you have this small web application locally, and you will also run the browser for accessing this locally. You could install it on a managed node, but there you have several dependencies where it's not possible. It's, for example, not supported on a domain controller. You will run into issues if there are other web servers present there and so on. There is a high available option. My preferred option is the second one we see here, the dedicated gateway server, the dedicated management server. And this is the way I use it in my live demo in a few minutes. The only thing where I have some optimizations for the demo here, I don't have one or more clients where I access the Windows Admin Center via the web browser. I use a web browser directly on the server. I wouldn't recommend this because regarding the security, we would be very, very clear in the discussion that it's not recommended to use the web browser directly on the server. But I think you agree it's easier for us in the live demo not always to switch between server, target server, and a client where I manage from. And this is the reason why I use the web browser directly on this management server. I will use the Edge browser. You are free to only choose to also choose the Google Chrome. The installation of Windows Admin Center is possible on the actual latest Windows Server operating system versions. We can run it on Windows Server 2022. This is my scenario. I have installation of Windows Admin Center on Windows Server 2022. We can also use 2019, 2016. The target servers are Windows Server 2012 and later, and for sure Azure Stack HCI. In my scenario, I will not use Windows Admin Center to configure any Windows Server services, traditional services, roles, file services, and things like this. I want to show you how to configure storage spaces direct based on Azure Stack HCI with the Windows Admin Center. And what you should see is my demo environment here. I have a physical host where I run several virtual machines. To give you a short impression about the demo environment we will use, we have this Windows Admin Center 01 machine. This is my Windows Admin Center host. I have a server 11. This is, for example, my domain controller for this environment. I have several other servers we are actually not using. I have a traditional storage spaces direct cluster. We will not use this in this live demo because we will focus on Azure Stack HCI. And in this environment, I have to choose here. I will use these two nodes here. These are virtual machines. So for having some easier things in the live demo, I'm working on the virtual machines, because in the physical hosts, we always have the physical hardware checks and it takes much more time. And here in the virtual machines, I will be a little bit more effective in configuring the things. And I think it's absolutely fine for us to see what happens in this configuration of Azure Stack HCI and the Technology Storage Spaces Direct with Windows Admin Center. So to give you an impression, if you are new to Azure Stack HCI, when I connect to one of these nodes, for example, Azure Stack HCI node 02, then I think you already know that Azure Stack HCI is always a server core installation. So you don't have the full Windows graphical user interface we see on my host. My physical host here is a Windows Server 2022, and for sure it has a graphical user interface. You can also install the Windows Server 2022 as a server core, but this is your choice. In Azure Stack HCI, you always have the server core installation. So for sure, I could do the configuration here via PowerShell directly at the host or via remote PowerShell. But the feedback of many partners and customers is we prefer a graphical user interface. And this is the reason why I want to show you how to use the Windows Admin Center. If you prefer PowerShell, so you feel free. You can do this. You can use your well-known scripts and your already tested scripts. So you don't have to switch to Windows Admin Center. Today, I'm not sure what are the plans on the roadmap in the far future. We already had Microsoft technologies in the past where Microsoft said, please use the wizards we provide, because if you don't use the wizards, maybe we are not able to manage it completely. This is not the message today. Today, the message is you can use your well-known PowerShell stuff, you're fine, or you can use the ease of Windows Admin Center if you like this. And I will show you in the live demo now how it works, give you an impression how it works, because on Windows Admin Center, my experience is that I often hear, Windows Admin Center, I tried this and I've seen there were some features missing I need for my configuration, for my scenario. And so I switched back to PowerShell or to my traditional tools. And as Carsten mentioned, Windows Admin Center is available in as a service model. So we get updates once or twice a year. And actually, the latest version is version 2103.2. And this is the version my demos are running on. Should be the latest build here, and I already updated some extensions in the Windows Admin Center. If you already worked with Windows Admin Center, you know in the settings here, so we can choose the option of the extensions. And in this extension list, you can install extensions of software and hardware partners. So Carsten mentioned the sponsors of the show, and all sponsors that will be here in these 2 days have extensions for the Windows Admin Center, so that you can also manage some of their hardware stuff. And if you have the Microsoft components, something like, for example, for us relevant, the cluster management things, then you can see here if you should install an update. Here actually we see the extensions that are available. And for example, for PowerShell, I can see here, oh, there's an update available, and I could install this update here, but I don't need this actually, so we will not spend any time on updating this. I already updated the relevant extensions we will need for this wizard here. So here we can see in Windows Admin Center the list of servers we can manage. And I already told you we can do a traditional server management. So for example, I could manage here my file server 02, the D114 file server 02 is my file server in this environment. But this is not the target. We want to work on the Azure Stack HCI nodes. In my scenario, they are already added to the list of servers, to the connection list, but this is not necessary to be able to configure an Azure Stack HCI cluster. So the first step is we click on Add in this Windows Admin Center page, and in the server clusters here, we have the Add if we already have a created cluster. So if our Azure Stack HCI cluster is already ready, then we can add this cluster to our Windows Admin Center to manage it, to manage volumes and things like this. I will do later. And we can create new. And create new is the interesting thing, because create new is not brand new. We have this for several months already, but it's a new thing. We didn't have this in Windows Server 2016 when Storage Spaces Direct started, and we didn't have this in Windows Server 2019 when Storage Spaces Direct continued, and it was a new feature for Azure Stack HCI. And this is the important message here. When I go to create new, there's a choice between Windows Server, deploy a failover cluster to run VMs or cluster roles and apps on Windows Server, and there's a second choice, Azure Stack HCI, deploy a hyper-converged cluster to run VMs on Azure Stack HCI. There's no choice, deploy an hyper-converged cluster based on Windows Server. And I think you are familiar with the Microsoft HCI configuration options you have. You can choose for Storage Spaces Direct in Windows Server 2022, or 2019 or 2016. So it's Storage Spaces Direct in Windows Server Data Center Edition, where you can enable the hyper-converged infrastructure features. The new opportunity since December 2020 is to use the Azure Stack HCI operating system. In Azure Stack HCI, we also have Storage Spaces Direct with extended features, but with a different licensing model. Windows Server is a permanent license, and Azure Stack HCI is a pay-per-use based on the number of cores you have in your physical hardware. The technology Storage Spaces Direct is in both of them, but Windows Admin Center says, okay, you can configure hyperconverged with Azure Stack HCI, or you can configure traditional with Windows Server. If you want to configure hyperconverged infrastructure with Windows Server Data Center, you have to do it the old style way. So you have to, you have to use PowerShell and the traditional tools and so on. Okay. So when we switch to Azure Stack HCI, this is what we have to do here. And it's very important because I had a support call a few days ago where a customer tried to configure storage spaces direct with this wizard on a traditional Windows server. And you will not be successful with this because this is not a scenario that is planned in this wizard. So I choose Azure Stack HCI, and as Carsten mentioned, I can select all servers in one site. This is what I will do. I will build a small 2-node Azure Stack HCI cluster, and I think this matches perfectly to what Helmut Otto will present tomorrow from SMB to data center. We can start very small, and we can scale up to several clusters and nodes in a larger scale here. Carsten already mentioned he wouldn't build a 16-node cluster. I absolutely agree. I would always build some smaller clusters with, for example, 4 nodes. But in my scenario, all the servers are in one site. What Carsten already presented in his session, in the previous session, was servers in 2 sites, so the stretch cluster scenario. So we will go to all servers in one site, and we will go a bit in detail to what happens in this wizard, because what you will see, the wizard is really cool designed, but it's a wizard. If you have different ideas how you configure it, and you are absolutely sure that this configuration you prefer is supported, but it's not provided by the wizard, yeah, then you will not be happy with this one. Let's have a look what the steps are. All servers in one site I want to create based on Azure Stack HCI. So what we see here is deployment of Azure Stack HCI cluster in 5 big major steps, and we have a lot of sub steps here. So for example, for the get started part, we have 7 individual steps that are configured, that are checked. So I have 7 individual steps I have to go through to finish this get started part. I have a lot of information here. I have a lot of links to docs.microsoft.com, and I'm often asked about books about Microsoft technologies and so on. I would always recommend to first go to docs.microsoft.com, and the important thing is, in docs.microsoft.com, you have 2 sections. You have one where you get the information about storage spaces direct, and one for Azure Stack HCI. So in this situation where we are focused on Azure Stack HCI, you should really prefer the Azure Stack HCI documentation. Many of the topics are the same, the situation, how you create volumes and how you work with it, but some things are really different. So first step, I will go to next, because I have to add servers. What is already here are my credentials. I need username and password of a user that is able to connect to the servers. I already have entered this in a previous session, so we don't need to do this here. First is I have to add my nodes, and I will do this here. I have the D114. This is my demo environment, and I have an Azure Stack HCI node 01. So this is my first server I want to add it here, and the wizard says I found this server in the domain mhdemolab.de, and I can add this server. I will do so. I will add this server to the list of the servers, and I will add the second one, D114 minus Azure Stack HCI node 02. And the great thing is there are a lot of things already checked here. So it checks the server names, the status. Is the server ready? Is the operating system fine? And the model. Is it from one of our sponsors? Is it from Lenovo, from Dell Technologies, from Fujitsu? Or in my case, it's a Microsoft virtual machine. The important thing about the model is for you, I think you know, and we have some presentations about this in the 2 days, is there are certified solutions for Azure Stack HCI, and they are integrated systems. And when you have an integrated system, you have some advanced capabilities in this wizard. You always should use a validated node, so a certified node for Azure Stack HCI. And here you can see the model, and you can see if it's really one of these systems I absolutely recommend it, and also Microsoft recommends. The next step, join to a domain. I already prepared this because you know domain join needs a restart, and restart, these are virtual machines, but also in the virtual machines we would have 30 seconds to 1 minute till they are back in my configuration here. And so this is the reason why I already joined them. If they are not joined, I can see this here, and the wizard will do the domain join for me. Next step, installation of features. If you are familiar with Storage Spaces Direct in Windows Server and or Azure Stack HCI, you know that you have some requirements for the implementation of Storage Spaces Direct. We need failover clustering. Carsten already explained this. We always have a cluster behind Storage Spaces Direct. So it's not a new, totally different thing. It is built on the foundation of Windows clustering. And so we need the failover cluster feature. We need for the hyperconverged scenario, Hyper-V. We need it for the switches with switch embedded teaming and so on. We need the Hyper-V role. To be able to configure everything we need here, the Active Directory stuff and the Hyper-V stuff, we need the PowerShell modules for both of them. The data deduplication is optional, but if it's not installed, you cannot use the deduplication on the volume. So this is the reason why it's always on the list. And here we have the data center bridging and BitLocker drive encryption. We have several sessions about networking in these 2 days. I think you will hear something about this also. The data center bridging is, for example, required if you use RDMA with a Rocky-based implementation to ensure that you have the prioritization of the traffic, the capability of prioritizing the traffic here. You see here, everything is installed. If not, this wizard will do the installation on the nodes, and you can stay in this wizard here, because you can see here's a refresh. If there would be something missing, I would have the button install the required features, then the features are installed, the nodes restart, and then I can refresh my list here and continue here. The next step is installation of updates. And here the wizard checks if there are new updates at Microsoft, and I can install them. The recommendation is in a real live implementation to install these updates. I can exactly see what it is. Let's check what is missing. I have a cumulative update here, and I have a cumulative update for Azure Stack HCI 20H2. Important thing about this here, Azure Stack HCI 20H2 is the actual version, but the Azure Stack HCI 21H2 is already available as a preview. It's a public preview. If you want to test Azure Stack HCI version 21H2, you always install first 20H2, and then you have, similar to the insider configuration in Windows Client, the option to switch from the latest supported version to the insider version or the preview version of Azure Stack HCI, and then this is installed via an update. This works very, very well. Okay, I will not install the updates here because this will take some time, and I can do this afterwards. I don't need these updates to show you how the implementation, the configuration works. Then we have install hardware updates, and this is a great point here because we will see, we recommend to check this again. we can't find any hardware updates. I can retry here. And when I read this text completely, I can see here that these hardware updates are available with the integrated systems and the systems where this is provided. So yeah, here is the text. This could be because your cluster isn't an integrated system. So there are several levels of certification for Azure Stack HCI solutions and systems. The validated node ensures that everything works. The integrated systems give you some advantages. And if I would have an integrated system here as a platform for the live demo, I would see here, for example, firmware updates, driver updates for my hardware. And this is a great advantage because if I don't have this, let's imagine my two virtual machines would be physical hosts, then I would have to ensure that these versions are on the level I need them. So I can do this manually for sure, but it's great to have this here. So next step, restart of the service. Here, the wizard checks if I need to restart any of the nodes. I see here one question, is your Windows Admin Center server joined to the domain? Yes. In my environment, all the nodes I'm working on are joined to my virtual domain. The domain is based on Windows Server 2022 already, but it would also work with an older Active Directory domain level. My Windows Admin Center is domain joined. My Azure Stack HCI nodes were domain joined. If they weren't domain joined, the wizard would have done this. Yes. If I would access via a client, I also would join this to the domain in the live demo. It would also be possible to work with a non-domain joined version. So next, networking. Networking is a very, very important part of this configuration wizard. And the first question is, it asks me, do you want to remove existing virtual switches? Yes, I want. I'm using these two nodes very often for live demos and I'm resetting them afterwards. And sometimes I forget to remove some switches, and this wizard here supports me to clean up the environment. What I often hear about the Storage Spaces Direct and the Azure Stack HCI implementation, that many customers, partners, and technicians are a little bit afraid of this networking part. I'm not sure what the reason for it is. Maybe because at the beginning of Storage Spaces Direct, not everything was documented very clear. And so maybe somebody or many of us run in first issues there. The great thing about the wizard is it eases this network part absolutely, because you can see here, first it checks networks adapters. This is what happens actually here in my environment. Then I select the management adapters. For sure, I need some adapters, minimum one, maybe more for redundancy, to manage the host operating systems. Then step 2.3, the virtual switches are created. Then step 2.4, RDMA is configured. RDMA is absolutely supported. And I remember that I delivered several hands-on workshops and training on the job things where we configured Storage Spaces Direct and where we had to use several tools to implement RDMA, PowerShell, and then to test if RDMA works. And this is now in this wizard. So if you say, okay, I have an understanding what the requirements for RDMA are, but I don't have a list of these tools I have to use, it's all in here. The last step, 2.5, define the networks. So here we decide which network is used for SMB and which one is for virtual machine traffic. So when we have a look here at one of the machines, I have configured several network adapters in these virtual machines. I have here one adapter. There's already a name on it. It's management. This adapter, I will choose this one here, the first one for the management network later. And then we have 3 network adapters, Ethernet 2, 3, and 4. I will use 2 of them for SMB, for the storage traffic, and 1 of them for the VM traffic. So it's the same configuration on the second host. You can see we can network adapters disable here. We can include and exclude. We can enable, refresh. So you can work on your network configuration here. So select management adapters. The wizard changes the selectable options based on your hardware configuration. Here, for example, I can see the second option is grayed out. I cannot configure a management network with 2 teamed network adapters. They would be teamed via switch embedded teaming because I only have 1 network adapter that is in my management network. So this is the only option I have here. If I would 2 adapters in the network, I could also choose the second option. It's clear this option would be recommended if you need redundancy on the management network. What for a production environment would be recommended. Yes, I want to select the management network. I do this here in the list here. This is, I would say, a little bit maybe not so directly clear. I have to read the full text to know that I can select these options here, because the checkbox only appears if I'm on this line with the network adapter. So the way how to do it, you move to the network adapter you want to select, and then you can click it. So if you have done this once, I think you will remember this. I select the 2 management network adapters. Now the great thing is, it's not only apply here the button, it's apply and test. So the settings are applied and they are tested. And when I get this green sign here, changes are applied and they are successfully tested. I had once the situation where this test was successful and I run in a problem later based on the network. In all the other cases, and I had several demos and implementations, I always had the situation that these checks helped me a lot, because now I can go to the next step, virtual switches. And here we have 3 options. I could create 1 virtual switch for compute and storage together. I could create 1 virtual switch for compute only. We see the SMB traffic would go directly via the network adapters. And the third option would be create 2 virtual switches. Carsten, maybe I may ask you, what's your preferred option here? Because I have one and I will use this preferred option here.
The second one.
Carsten would use the second one. Okay, so sorry, we are actually not on video, because in the live demo, I think it's better if you have it on full screen. We will switch to the video later again. So Carsten prefers the second one. I would also prefer the second one. Can you say what's the reason for you, Carsten, that you prefer the second?
For me, it's in the second one. First, to explain it, we have 2 adapters for our virtual switch for our VMs and maybe some virtual management, not here. And we have 2 separate adapters for our east-west traffic or for our interconnect between the nodes. And I use them directly. So why create a Hyper-V switch and then create virtual SMB adapters with RDMA? It's a lot of software involved. We have a Hyper-V switch, we have the virtual RDMA adapter. You have to bind them to the hardware adapters. And a lot of software, there are maybe some problems in the software, so why not use them directly? Do it simple, use them directly, don't add a lot of layers on top of the direct things.
Yeah, this is also the way how I am thinking here, because I often get the question about storage spaces direct and the hyperconverged thing itself. Is it possible to have a fast storage here because we go over the network? And I always say we don't, I usually don't see the limitations in the network when it's configured accordingly. We have network interface cards. I've seen a post from Cosmos, I think so. He has some samples of network interface cards with 400 gigabit network speed. So I would say in the typical implementations I see in the field, it's 25 gigabits or maybe 100 gigabits today, but this is usually not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is there if you don't plan your workload you expect. And this I see this may happen here sometimes, because you think, okay, I have the network interface cards, I put them on one virtual switch and I split off the traffic and it will go well. Here in the scenario Carsten mentioned he prefers, and I will show you in the live demo, you have always this dedicated connectivity with two physical connections. We use here the multi-channeling. We don't need any teaming. And so we can be sure these two ports are for my storage. And so it's very easy to plan, to calculate. It's fine. And as Carsten mentioned, the third option also would give us these two dedicated ports, or maybe more. We can have up to 8 ports in this switch embedded teaming configuration. But why should I add this software layer if I don't need it? Maybe you have some more flexibility. So if you have a scenario where, say, I need this switch embedded teaming switch, then you are fine, then choose the third option. But if you don't need this, if you don't use any of this functionality, my recommendation would also be to choose the second one. Okay. Maybe you have seen, if I choose one of these scenarios, something also changes on the bottom of this page. And the text says me, adapters you don't select can't be used by virtual machines, but the host server can still use them, for example, storage spaces direct. So what I choose here, this means the text, I'm choosing the network interfaces for the workload, for the virtual machine traffic. So what I choose here are the network interface card for the first set team here. So I'm choosing in this list below the adapters for this switch here, and all the adapters I don't choose here are used for the storage traffic I can see here below, and this is what the text means. And in my configuration in the virtual machines, the situation is that I use one adapter for the VM traffic and 2 for the storage traffic. What may be important for you, we have here a small button where we can click on Advanced. Here you can change the name of the virtual switch that is created. The default is compute switch. You can decide which load balancing algorithm you want to use. Hyper-V port is recommended, and you can use or configure the virtual machine queuing and the queue pairs here. It's a little bit hidden, but it's there. In the next step, you can decide to configure RDMA. In my virtual machines, I will not use the RDMA configuration. You know, in the physical implementation, you can have RDMA based on IWARP. This is what Microsoft actually recommends. And you can use RDMAs based on RoCE, based on RDMA over converged Ethernet. I would recommend, please use RDMA in a physical implementation. In most scenarios, it's not correct. I would say it doesn't matter if you have IWARP or RoCE. It does matter because there are differences. But the important thing is to have RDMA. The discussion between IWARP and RoCE is sometimes a little bit tricky. So please choose one of these two and ensure that you have RDMA on your storage traffic where it's possible. We have heard that there are some limitations in the stretch cluster scenario. In the defined networks, I have a great table, I would say, where I can configure all my networks with the names, with the IP addresses, with the subnet masks, with the VLAN IDs. I will not do this here because this would only cost time and it will not change anything here. I will use these default values I added for demo purpose, but I think you can imagine you have your network interface cards and they need all to be configured. You want to have names on it, you want to have IP addresses, you have the requirement of specifying the correct subnet mask. You need for traffic prioritization in a Rocky-based implementation and also for traffic prioritization in an IVAR-based implementation, the VLAN ID, because the VLAN ID is used to transport the prioritization tag, and you can do all this here. You have also a little bit hidden the advanced button because it's not blue, it's a little white here. You can click on the advanced to have some additional configuration options regarding the jumbo packet size and the encapsulation overhead if you have here individual requirements in your environment. So also here, not only apply, it's always apply and test. And you can see here, there's a retry connectivity test and there's a download report. This will take a few minutes, I think so, till the test finishes here. And this will be in the next steps, clustering and storage also. In the relevant steps, I can always download a report for documentation and to find the issue if something goes wrong, if you have a warning or if you have an error there, then you can have a look in the report in the details and see what's going wrong with the configuration. So actually, it's testing the connectivity, it's testing if the networks are reachable, if they are pingable, and so on. Depending on the number of network interface cards you have, and depending on the number of virtual switches you created, this will be will take a little bit longer or not so long here. And always, this is live here, so no video, no cut out content here. But if you do this on physical nodes, you will see it takes longer because it really checks the hardware. It really checks the hardware configuration. So let's have a look at the next steps that will be configured when this check has finished. The next step is clustering. I already mentioned this. When we prepared our nodes, we always configure a Windows Server cluster where we build storage spaces direct on top of it. So clustering is the next step, and everybody who is familiar with clustering will find here his known and relevant steps. In step 4, we configure the storage. The storage space is direct. Here, the wizard checks if we have the required number of disks, the required type of disks. And the last step is software-defined networking. This is optional. We will skip this step in the live demo. Software-defined networking is very, very interesting, but it's a huge topic on its own. So we could fill several sessions with this software-defined networking itself. So tests are passed. Everything is fine. I mentioned the report. I will not download the report here, but I think you can imagine you have a lot of detailed information. I will download it so we can have a look at it later. Next step, clustering. You know, a Windows Server cluster has to be validated to be supported. We don't need any longer any cluster certified hardware. This changed generations of Windows ago. So we have the situation, we need to validate the cluster, and we can do this here. For sure, you can also do this in Failover Cluster Manager. You can do this via PowerShell. But in the past, the situation was you also had to validate the cluster, and you had maybe to switch the tool. Maybe you started to prepare your nodes in Server Manager, and then you had to switch to Failover Cluster Manager, and then you had to continue in PowerShell. Now we're doing everything in this wizard here. The important thing is the cluster has to be supported regarding this validation. So there, everything should be green. If we have a warning, we can configure this cluster, but maybe it's not supported. If we have an error, we cannot configure the cluster with this configuration. So then we have to work it. So when we have an error, you have to fix this. If you have a warning, the recommendation is to have a detailed look on it, what the warning is. What we often have, and I think I will have this, is a warning about the software levels. Here you can see this. I have a warning in the system configuration, and when I scroll down, I can see, oh, the system configuration, I have a warning in the software update levels, warning here. When I download the report, I can see, okay, in the report, let's see here, then I will see in the system configuration, I have some missing update on one node. Yeah, this is not perfect, but for us, it's fine. I can install this update later, and maybe you remember the first step where I said we don't install the updates regarding the limited time we have. Okay, so next step, I want to create the cluster. And the cluster I'm creating here, it requires a name. It's registered in DNS. My cluster will have the name D114- Azure Stack HCI cluster 21. Or let's take a 2021. No, it's too long. 15 characters, sorry. Let's leave the 21. I'm using DHCP in my environment. The easy thing is for me, I only have to click on next or create. If I enter IP addresses, always the risk is that I have a typo there. For sure, in a production environment, in most scenarios, you will use static IP addresses here. Then I can decide or configure what happens to the storage here. Default is to add all eligible storage to the cluster, and the default is to use all networks. This depends on your configuration if this is fine. I, for example, have a cluster here, a physical cluster, where I wouldn't choose this option because I have dedicated network interface cards that should not be used here. Create cluster is the next step, and if the wizard didn't lie in the previous steps, everything should go well with the cluster creation, and in a few minutes we should see our Windows Server cluster on Azure Stack HCI, where we don't have storage spaces direct enabled, because this happens in the next step. So when I go to next, to the storage, I have the first thing, erase the drives. On a brand new Azure Stack HCI certified system, it shouldn't be necessary to erase the drives because they are brand new from the OEM. In my scenario, I mentioned I'm using them for several demos, and to be absolutely sure, you should erase them. In this case, there's a script in the background that ensures that there's no old metadata on these drives, that they are empty and prepared for the usage with storage spaces direct. Okay, drives are erased. You see, the next steps are, now everything successfully erased. The next is checking the drives. Maybe you already talked to one of the hardware vendors of certified systems for storage spaces direct in Azure Stack HCI, and then you have realized that you have requirements for the disks. You need minimum 4 disks on the storage layer. If you have a cache, you need minimum 2 disks on the cache layer. You can have more disks. If you have flash only, you can use this flash only configuration for storage without any cache and so on. We won't discuss these disk requirements now, but the wizard checks this for us. It says, okay, I have on each of the servers 4 drives. And this is a configuration that is supported. And we will get a warning in the next steps of the wizard that says, I didn't found any cache drives. Yeah, but this is fine for me in my configuration. Working without cache drives is not supported if you have hard drives for storing data. So, you know, Storage Spaces Direct supports a combination of hard disk drives and flash disk drives. If you have this combination, you need to use minimum 1 flash layer for the cache, but the wizard decides this automatically. Here it says, sorry, I didn't find any cache drives. I'm in the virtual machines, so it's fine to only work with this virtual hard disks. And here, again, a detailed report. And for me, important, everything was successful. And now the last big step. This was in the past always a PowerShell step, enable cluster S2D. And now this is a button here, but for sure, in the background, this wizard triggers the enable cluster S2D on the nodes. So I mentioned software-defined networking. I will skip this step. If the enable cluster S2D is successful, we have an Azure Stack HCI based storage spaces direct implementation where we have already one pool. Carsten mentioned in a non-stretch cluster, we always have one pool with all the disks, and I've already one volume. Maybe you remember since Windows Server 2019, we have a cluster performance history that's provided by a volume in the storage spaces direct pool, where we can see some historical data about my storage spaces direct configuration. My disks, my virtual disks, my volumes for the workload I want to store can be added now in the Windows Admin Center. I have to wait till this step is finished, but then I can create volumes, I can configure volumes, and so on. Everything works. And I can try to create virtual machines, because the question is, why do we do this all? We want to create a hyperconverged infrastructure, and in the hyperconverged infrastructure, we want to run virtual machines on these nodes that also provide the storage capacity. And when I try to create a virtual machine here in exactly this configuration, I will receive an error, because this is Azure Stack HCI. And Azure Stack HCI has to be connected to Azure to provide the full capability. You will not realize this when you create volumes. You will never have a downtime for any existing workload if you are not connected to Azure. You don't need to be connected to Azure 24/7. So it's absolutely fine if you register the cluster to Azure and then you are disconnected for a few days. You have to be connected to Azure minimum once a month to keep the full functionality. And important, you will never have a downtime for existing workload if Azure is not reachable or something like this. But if you want to create new virtual machines, then you have to be registered in Azure. And this is provided in the Windows Admin Center, and now it takes a little bit longer than planned. And one question for you, Carsten, we had this discussion about registering Azure Stack HCI with Windows Admin Center in Azure. And you mentioned you were not successful. I've often issues. This is the reason for my question. In most of the scenarios, my registration of Azure Stack HCI in Azure via Windows Admin Center does not work today. Yeah, so I'm usually using PowerShell.
Yeah, usually my experience is the last setups, it always works. So with 2103.2, I didn't have issues.
Okay.
So you have to first register VAC in Azure, and then you can register the Azure Stack HCI cluster. But there is also a PowerShell code snippet that you can use that works very well.
Yeah, I think I will need to use this PowerShell option to register it, because I had or I have the same experience Carsten has or had, that in the last time I was successful to configure it via Windows Admin Center, but when I tested it yesterday for the demo for today, I got this old error. And let's see here. Yeah.
Just a reminder, we are 53 minutes into the sessions. We have some questions. So
yeah. I will finish. I will skip the software-defined networking part, and I have seen the time. I thought I can take till 55.
You can take 55.
Okay, I try. So let's have a look at the cluster we created. The Azure Stack HCI 21 cluster here. This is the cluster we created, and For sure, if you already worked with storage spaces direct with Windows Admin Center, you know you have the drives here, you have the volumes here. This is the management part. This is not the configuration part. What is still part of the management, here we can see Azure connection, it's not yet registered. But my Windows Admin Center is already connected with Azure. This is what Carsten managed because I have several hybrid services. When I go to the settings here in this Azure Stack HCI cluster, I can also see Azure Stack HCI registration. It's actually not registered. So there are two ways how to register it. And when I click here on register, the Windows Admin Center uses my Azure connectivity I've prepared here and says, okay, I try to register this Azure Stack HCI with Microsoft Azure, and I've seen here a message that it doesn't work. I could try to fix this via the settings. If you run in this issue in a production environment, you can do the registration directly on the nodes. And I will show you here how you can do this when you use the Azure Stack HCI node 01, for example. I can leave here to the PowerShell, and there's a docs article that describes how this works. When you go to docs.microsoft.com, you have three ways how to do it. You can do it via PowerShell, you can do it via Windows Admin Center, and you can do it via JSON. What's your preferred way? And the first thing is you need to install the module name Azure Stack HCI here. You can take it from the article here and put it to this machine here. Can use this thing to import the module, and then you can continue and register your cluster in Azure, and you need your subscription ID, and you can find this in the Azure portal. And you need to use one computer name out of the list of your servers. Now, Carsten is showing me the time, and sorry for this. I think you got an impression how it works. I am sure you will be successful in configuring your cluster and registering here. And maybe we should use the last 5 minutes or 4 minutes to take a few minutes, 3 minutes. To take a few questions from the Q&A. So thank you for your time first. Sorry for using most of the time for the live demo. And now, Carsten, which question should we take?
I hope Didier is ready. His first one was, where is the position of WAC and VMM, so System Center VMM 2019? Yeah. Does System Center VMM still make sense for Azure Stack HCI infrastructure, and where?
Yeah, so Microsoft says we have both tools available. So System Center Virtual Machine Manager is not replaced by Windows Admin Center, but the situation is when I'm allowed to be clear, none of these tools can be used for the 100% configuration. So I'm always using Windows Admin Center, Failover Cluster Manager, PowerShell, Hyper-V Manager in combination. If a customer has System Center in the latest version, System Center Virtual Machine Manager, and I think there's a preview program for the next update there, then I'm also additionally using Virtual Machine Manager. It's not the situation that you say Virtual Machine Manager is the tool you have to pay for and then there's everything in there. If you have VMM, you will also need Windows Admin Center to have this great new stuff. Yeah.
So one guy wanted to see how you configure SDN with Windows Admin Center. You skipped that and there was no time for that. Yeah. Sorry, but I have done it. It's not too complex. then can extensions be installed in offline air-gapped scenarios? So
yes, extensions. There's an extension catalog that is available online, but you can also provide this offline. You can specify the file share path inside your network where you put these extension packages and then you can install them from there.
But to clarify, if you use Azure Stack HCI,
yeah,
you can't have an air-gapped scenario.
Yes,
Azure Stack HCI has always to be, not always, but every 30 days you have to be connected to the cloud. So there is no air-gapped scenario for Azure Stack HCI.
Yes.
For WAC, maybe.
For Windows Admin Center, yes. For Azure Stack HCI, no,
Yeah. Can we connect with Azure and manage VMs from Azure portal? That's the last question, and then we go to Didier.
Yeah, the recommendation is for Azure Stack HCI, and it's done automatically for Azure Stack HCI 21H2 to configure Azure Arc as first step when we connected Azure Stack HCI to Azure. And then we have first capability to manage resources from Azure. And I'm absolutely sure that in the future we will see more and more Azure portal features we can use to manage local resources. Yeah.
Okay, thanks Manfred for the great demo-rich presentation. I liked it a lot. I wanted to eat during your presentation, but I couldn't because it was very interesting. I have done this stuff, of course. So